who is also the Curator of Education at our local Toledo Zoo. Mitchell is going to talk today about the hard work on Project PRAIRIE that rethinks landscaping and campuses and universities. So without further ado, thank you.
Well, good morning and happy Earth Day to everybody today. So today I'm going to be talking about, well, quite a few different things. I'm going to be talking about Project PRAIRIE. I'm going to be probably spending most of my time towards the end of my talk, which is founding on Project PRAIRIE, but I'm going to kind of set the stage for Project PRAIRIE at the beginning of my talk. So the first part, let me see. First thing I'm going to talk about are lawns. Okay, on Earth Day, let's talk about lawns. So, just a general definition that you would find in any dictionary. It's a very old word, but in our current lingo here in the U.S., I mean, we have a lot of different synonyms for it: grass, yard, turf, grounds, terrace, commons. Here's an old word for you, greensward. And here's a word that all of you are very familiar with, Bowling Green. So, the United States, our culture here, we have a real love affair with the lawn. We have deep roots, and it goes back actually to Europe, from England here to the United States, but a lot of the colonial elites would landscape their estates using lawns. So a smooth green plain would give a really nice view of the estate. In fact, if you look at a lot of the portraits from that time period, you'll notice like over the shoulder, it has a view of the estate. Basically, again, communicating prosperity from these particular landowners, though this guy right here doesn't look, it looks like he has dandelions on his lawn or something, so not too happy. So again, turfing the ground signal that you could devote your time to leisure activities, that you weren't wasting your time growing, let's say, or having an orchard on your property, or let's say having a garden on your property, that you can devote your time to other things. So how times have changed? Well, not really. Here in the United States, we still have a love affair to this day, 200 years later, with the lawn. In fact, I pulled these images that you see right now off a website, basically that was the 10 best lawns in Denver, Colorado. So the lawn is still king in terms of urban landscaping here in the United States. Let's take a look at lawn care by the numbers. Some of these numbers are kind of staggering. So lawn care industry is worth $105 billion in the United States. Global market for lawnmowers is $43 billion. Lawn services generate mowing the lawn generates the same kind of pollution as you would get if you drove a car for 11 miles. 90 million pounds of fertilizer. I don't think maybe some of these statistics are a surprise to you. 78 million pounds of pesticide. And here's one that kind of floored me. 10 tons more herbicides per acre are spent on lawns than fields in agribusiness. All right, so there's a lot of industry put into lawn care here in the United States. So one thing, too, is about the amount of land that lawns do take up. So again, 40 million acres of land in the United States is taken up into lawns. So Forrest Gump is going to have a lot of work to do to mow all those 40 million acres. But we think that there's a better way of doing urban landscaping. So is it time to deconstruct the perfect lawn here in the United States? I would posit that it is time to start doing some deconstruction. And there's a number of people who are moving in that direction. Many of you have probably heard of Doug Tallamy. He is advocating for bringing more natural type of landscaping back into our home environment. Even small changes, attracting and planting native plants and attracting native pollinators can make a huge difference. So really important movement. And I'm not discounting the fact that a lot of us like our gardening. As a matter of fact, these two next pictures I'm going to show you is my backyard at home. I have a fascination with daylilies. They're not native. I think they're beautiful plants. But on the other hand, I also have a native prairie in my backyard. So what I'd like to do is kind of strike a balance. Can we strike a balance? Can we have species in our yard that are attractive to native wildlife, to native pollinators, on top of the traditional urban landscaping, by the way, which are mostly European species that have no linking pollinator to them that's native here in the United States. So again, pollinators are important. So not only bumblebees and other types of bees, but butterflies, flies in general, beetles, attracting all these native insects and native pollinators to our yards. That brings me to talking a little about what our Wild Toledo program at the Toledo Zoo. So our Wild Toledo program, we have greenhouses that we grow thousands of native plants, and also we are segueing now into both shrubs and trees. So we make these things for sale to the general public, but we also utilize this plant material in order to invest our time in putting native prairies into not only schools, I'm going to talk about in a minute, but private landowners. So we have a prairie landscaping business now at the zoo. We also work with corporate offices and changing the ubiquitous lawns that you find, like Dana, that's right down here on Dorr Street, Owens, Illinois, Owens Corning, taking those large lawns and turning them more into native habitat, which is more attractive and more beneficial to our native wildlife. So these are just some of the scenes of the native landscaping that we've done through our Wild Toledo program. And so what I want to do is spend now just talking a little bit about the habitat itself. So what is a prairie? Probably most of you in this audience probably are aware and are familiar with prairies. But prairies are generally defined as a stretch of grasslands with intermixed forbs and grasses and shrubs, basically moderate temperatures and moderate rainfall, and one hallmark of them, very few trees. This is actually a prairie landscape from southeastern Arizona down near the Mexican border. So the historic range of prairies in the United States, we're in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains where there was limited rainfall. So as rainfall increased, as you moved from west to east, you also saw a change in the type of prairie that you were looking at. So the drier areas that were closer to the Rockies, you would find more short grass prairies. As the precipitation increased a bit, you would get mixed grass moving to tall grass prairie. And as you notice, there is a little prairie peninsula right here in Ohio. So kind of a more close-up. So this is basically sites where there were large historic prairie here in the United States, or excuse me, here in Ohio. Prairie never was a big part of the landscape in Ohio, probably about 4%, as most of you probably know, it was mostly eastern deciduous forest. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of original prairie. There's probably less than 100 acres of original prairie left in the United States, or excuse me, in Ohio, but most of those are actually found in areas that haven't been touched by the plow for quite a few years. So like cemeteries are really good places in order to see native prairie. Railroad right-of-ways, power line cuts, all of those are areas where you can find native prairie that have not been under the plow. Of course, there's been restored prairie. We can go here in the Toledo area, go out to Wildwood or Secor Metro Park, and we can see restored prairie habitat. But original native habitat here in the state of Ohio is pretty rare. There's a lot of environmental benefits from having a prairie type of landscape. I mentioned earlier increased pollinator population. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but you would be surprised, like for instance at my native prairie in my backyard at home, I'm flabbergasted by the number of pollinators that show up just because the prairie's there. And I look out into the sea of grass that's around me in my neighborhood, and it's basically barren. There's no animal life. It's monoculture of grass for the most part. So basically, it's kind of like a field of dreams. If you build it, they'll come. Just have to put it in. Resting spot for migratory birds moving through. I see that every year. I'm pretty close to McGee Marsh, and I see migratory birds moving through and resting and feeding. There are other environmental benefits: decreasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because all of this carbon dioxide is removed and fixed in the soil of the roots. Reduces upkeep, and that's important if you have acres of land that you want to convert from lawn to prairie. You can save a substantial amount of money in just the labor costs and equipment that goes into the upkeep. Reduces runoff, so stormwater runoff. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Food source for lots of different types of urban animals. Urban beautification, we don't talk about that very often, but it creates a beautiful scene during the peak months of the summer when these things are in full bloom. And again, it's just great habitat for native wildlife. Some of the prairies that have been installed on local schools, they put trail cams out there. It's amazing what we'll see on the trail cams, like owls, and probably you would recognize having a lot of white-tailed deer coming here, but coyotes. So really seeing a lot of native wildlife coming into this restored habitat. So again, talk a little bit about the environmental benefits. The groundwater infiltration is because of the deep root system, creating channels that penetrate deep into the soil, really improves infiltration of water, captures a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere, captures a lot of nutrients. So really important in that aspect. I just wanted to show this little graphic of the roots of traditional prairie plants. These are prairie forms and grasses. Way up there on the upper left-hand corner, that's the root system of your traditional type of turf grass. So as you can see, these roots are deep, and these plants can survive conditions that your lawn would never be able to survive. So what animals benefit from this? And this is where I want to dive into this a little more deeply. I'm going to talk a little bit about pollinators. I'm an insect guy by trade. I did a lot of work at the zoo doing surveys of endangered butterflies. I work with our captive collection at the zoo. So I'm kind of an insect geek, kind of interesting that we have the big megafauna at the zoo, but I've really concentrated a lot of my effort on the smaller things that make the world go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about bees in general, about bumble and otherwise, but there's many, many different taxa of bees. By the way, most of them solitary. There are not a lot of eusocial type of bees. Most of them are solitary, so probably recognize the one here on the left. So we have carpenter bees, resin bees, cellophane bee, wool carder bee. So these are insects. These are bees that will show up in your prairie habitat. Going along with that, there are a lot of different types of insects that actually mimic bees in order to gain some protection from them through Batesian mimicry. So you have all sorts of critters here. You have hoverflies, like you had here. You have robberflies, and then you even have scarab beetles that actually mimic bees. Anybody see anything wrong with this photo right here? Yeah, it's a fly. Okay. Okay, bees of the world. How would you like to be Christopher O'Toole and get this sent to you by your publisher? Like, that's a fly, all right? So it even fools, the publishers pretty well. So I'm going to talk about bumblebees. I've done a little bit of work in our prairies with bumblebees, so I'm going to give you kind of a real quick primer on bumblebees. One thing that's important to note is that there's lots of different kinds of species. In the United States, there's about 46 species of bumblebees. There's a lot of diversity among bumblebees, mostly in the length of the proboscis, the tongue, which allows them to take advantage of different length corollas on the flowers. So if you have a long tongue, you can feed on things like monarda. If you have a short tongue like the brown-belted bumblebee, you would probably feed on things like milkweed. So it really, their tongue length really corresponds to the type of floral resources that they go after. bumblebees have a different life cycle than what we are used to, like with a traditional honeybee. They're annular. So basically you have a queen that mated the last fall, last summer, that is hibernated over the winter time. The rest of the colony died. So all of those workers, the previous queen, they die. So the bumblebees that you see flying around right now are actually going to be queens out looking for new nesting sites. They're big, they're robust, hard to miss. I've seen a few in the last week flying around. But that queen, then, as she's mated, she'll come out, she finds like, let's say, a chipmunk hole, she goes into it, she goes out and gathers pollen and nectar. She makes like a little bee bread with that, lays her egg on that. The eggs hatch, and then you have the beginning of your workers, and then it takes off from there. Their colonies don't get anywhere near the size of a honeybee colony, but again, these are annular creatures. Their entire colony dies off every season, and the only one left is that mated queen. So I'm just going to run through some of the more common ones you'll see in our area. The most common one, obviously, would be the common eastern bumblebee. Probably 8 out of 10 bumblebees that I observe are going to be this particular species. They're abundant, but throughout the eastern United States. This is the two-spotted bumblebee. It's not nearly as common as the common eastern bumblebee, but still found in fairly good numbers. Usually see these feeding a lot on, they seem to like honeysuckle quite a bit. I wanted to mention a rusty-patched bumblebee. This was a bumblebee that was extremely common in the East several decades ago. But unfortunately, this animal has declined so precipitously that it is now protected under the United States Endangered Species Act. The last sighting of this bee in the state of Ohio, believe it or not, was at the Toledo Zoo in 2013. That's the last time this bumblebee was seen in the state of Ohio. They're fairly more common if you go out west, a little bit west and north. Wisconsin, Illinois is where you're going to see these animals surviving. This is a brown belted bumblebee. This is another one. This is the one I most often see nectaring on milkweed. They seem to have a real preference for this when it's in bloom. Golden northern bumblebee. This is one that is actually a pretty beautiful bumblebee. As you can see, it's a lot of yellow on this, so it's fairly easy to distinguish from the other ones. By the way, I didn't mention this. The workers are fairly easy to recognize for each one of the different species and to put it into that species category. The males are a completely different story. Males are extremely variable and really hard to identify in the field. The workers, though, they have some pretty good field marks that allow you to ID them. This is another rare one. This is the American bumblebee. This is a bumblebee that nests on the surface of the ground quite frequently, and it's kind of an aggressive bee. In fact, you've heard the term beeline before. One of my encounters with this particular species of bumblebee was watching bumblebees go in and out of the siding of my house, and one of these things popping out and making a beeline right for my face where it stung me on my forehead. This is a black and gold bumblebee. This is a long-tongued species. You see there, it's on penstemon. Okay, so it has to work a little bit to get the nectar out of there. By the way, I wanted to mention this about bumblebees. They have a really interesting technique for gathering pollen out of the Solanaceae family of plants. Solanaceae, the anthers have the pollen on the inside of the anther. So in order for them to gather that pollen, what they do is they grab the anther with their mandibles, they vibrate their wings, and as they vibrate their wings, the pollen jumps out of the anther and onto their body. It's called buzz pollination. All right, so they can take advantage of pollen resources that, let's say, honeybees and other bees cannot take advantage of. So honeybees are really important in increasing your yield. So I think probably a lot of you guys grow tomatoes, so you have bumblebees around, you're going to get a better crop of tomatoes. Instead of them selfing, you're going to get these bumblebees doing the pollinating for you. Also really important in terms of the blueberry industry too. Another cuckoo bumblebee. So you've heard of birds, the cuckoos, they're parasitic. Well, guess what? There's some parasitic bumblebees as well. So these are ones that actually, the queen will go into the nest, and they usually have specific hosts that they go to. So what's really interesting about the queens of the cuckoos is that they have a thicker exoskeleton. And so when it goes in to the nest and takes over, that queen, let's say that's a common eastern queen, really doesn't have a chance against it, trying to sting and can't penetrate the exoskeleton. Kills the queen, the host queen, and then basically slays the workers in that colony in order to raise its brood. These guys are extremely variable. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but these guys are fairly hard to tell apart, and usually these guys appear late in the summer when their numbers are high, so I'll see them out nectaring on things like, I think this is agassiz and ascissa, so I see them hanging around that quite a bit. So here's really interesting about the biology of these guys, just dive into this a little bit. When we think of biodiversity in the world, most of us probably instantly think about the tropics. All right, so you go down to the tropics in terms of biodiversity when it comes to amphibians and birds in particular, but these guys, that's not where their highest diversity is found in the world. They're most diverse in the Himalayas and colder climates. So bumblebees are adapted to colder climates. In fact, they can thermoregulate. So you will see them flying when there's still snow on the ground. So they'll vibrate their wing muscles, generate heat, and that prevents them to fly when other pollinators can't even move. So a really interesting part of that. Also, get this, they also incubate their eggs in the same way. So the female will be by those initial eggs that she lays, and then she will vibrate her wings in order to increase the temperature. So I wanted to mention some of the conservation concerns with bumblebees. And these conservation concerns, many of them can be addressed by just changing our preferred habitats a little bit. Habitat loss, I mean, that's again, ubiquitous with a lot of different species in the world in terms of being endangered or whatever. Pathogen spillover, I'll get into that in a second. Pesticide use, as you can imagine, and then with bumblebees being adapted to a colder climate, climate change is really detrimental. I want to just show you this picture. This is a photo I pulled off of Google Maps of a rural road in Wood County. What do you notice about it? Do you notice any floral resources? No, there's no floral resources at all. So you can drive up and down these county roads in many rural areas of Ohio. You'll see lots of corn, you'll see grasses along ditches, but you will not see any floral resources. And so obviously we need floral resources if we're going to be able to help our pollinator community. And they need several different types of habitat. They need foraging habitat, okay, so they need their energy needs. They need overwintering habitat, and they need nesting habitat. So they have quite a few requirements on the habitat that they exploit. Fragmentation resist movements, that's another common theme. But what is important is like our urban and rural gardens, particularly native ones, are really important stopgaps in helping these animals. So let me talk a little bit about pathogen spillover. Many of you may know this, but bumblebees basically come in boxes. Common eastern bumblebee, you can buy those bumblebees if you are a tomato, a hothouse tomato or pepper grower, and place these boxes of bumblebees in your greenhouse in order to exploit their pollination services. A lot of the common eastern bumblebees, though, you would think they would be raised here in the United States. They are not. They are raised commercially in Europe and shipped here. Unfortunately, there are various parasites and diseases then that are transmitted from Europe to here to our populations in the United States, where many of our species have no resistance for. Nosema bombi, that is a microsporidia, it's a fungus that actually gets in the gut and the malpighian tubules in our bumblebees and causes a whole host of problems. Again, it's hypothesized that that led to the demise of our rusty-patched bumblebee. Pesticide use, obviously, is another issue, particularly when we have a lot of the workers out foraging. Systemics are mostly the issue with this because on a systemic, those poisons, those chemicals are transmitted to pollen and to the nectar. Mentioned climate change. One phenomenon that's really interesting with bumblebees, though, is that the southern populations are being squeezed north, but, and this is unknown, nobody knows the reason why. So when they get squeezed north from the southern limit, they don't move north, so they're basically squeezed in like a sandwich and really don't have an explanation for why that is. But it really takes a toll on various populations. Like I said, the two that I'm thinking of, I mentioned earlier, the American bumblebee, which is, their numbers have greatly reduced, and of course the rusty-patched bumblebee. I just wanted to show this little graph here. This is a really simple study I did a number of years ago, basically just presence and absence. I wanted to show this because it kind of demonstrates why diversity is important in our habitat. So this is what we call the Broadway Prairie at the zoo. So the Broadway Prairie is between our parking lot at the zoo and the apartment building as you're moving towards downtown. There's a site there that's probably about, I'd say, 8-9 acres. That's been developed into a really nice working prairie. And then these other areas, okay, we have the formal garden, nature's neighborhood is one of the children's exhibit at the zoo. But I just wanted you to note, we have a little bit better distribution of diversity with the bumblebee species that we were seeing in the prairie than we are in the other three. If you notice, particularly in nature's neighborhood, the vast, vast majority of these bees are going to be common eastern bumblebee. By the way, they're a medium length, tongued on the common eastern, so they can take advantage of a number of different types of plant material. But again, just a very small study that kind of demonstrates a little bit about what we're talking about with native plants representing a diverse type of flower that's available to the bumblebees, that the various bumblebees with different length tongues, proboscis, can exploit. All right, let me talk now about Project PRAIRIE. I wanted to kind of set the stage for why we chose to get into this business. I am an educator by profession at the zoo. I'm the Curator of Education. I've been in that role for quite a number of years now. And when we are working with children at the zoo, obviously we have a vast collection of animals from all over the world. But the big issue that we see, particularly in my department, is making connections between what's going on in Africa and what's going on here at home. Sometimes it can be difficult. So this is one of the reasons why we created Project PRAIRIE. All right, so we can make conservation connections with the students that we work with what's right outside their back door. So what is Project PRAIRIE? Well, it's basically a partnership between the Education Department at the Toledo Zoo and Wild Toledo to install native prairie habitat on school properties throughout Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. So the schools end up reaping the economic benefits, the environmental and the educational benefits of having these prairies on ground. So there is lots of green space at school. So this is a Google Earth image of Holland Elementary out in Holland, Ohio, part of the Springfield school system. This is an area here that comprises about 3 acres of land here. This is Wolf Creek that runs down here. And then we installed a prairie. This is a half-acre prairie that we installed about 4 years ago. As a matter of fact, this is one of our better functioning prairies in the Project PRAIRIE system. But as you can see, this is not unique in school systems. In fact, I read a statistic that basically said that the school districts, they spend an average of about $600 per student per school on just basic landscaping care within the school districts. That's a lot of money. And so if we can add these native habitats, we're not only saving the school district money, but we're also creating a learning space for the students. So as I mentioned, we're creating a community-based learning environment right outside the classroom door. This is the Prairie at Star Elementary out in Oregon. And this is the Prairie out at Hall Prairie out in the Perrysburg system. Again, these are right outside the door of the classrooms that the teachers and students can take advantage of. So we engage students in inquiry type of pedagogy. So we're not learning from a book. We're getting the students out into the prairies to actually study the prairie, okay? Study the soil, so the abiotic factor, and also the biotic factors in these prairies. So we do everything from very simple types of inquiry, like this student here is basically just going out and marking tick marks on the types and colors of flowers that bumblebees prefer from this student's observations. Really simple types of investigations. So students are also engaged in citizen science activities. So one of the things, those activities that's really popular with the students and the teachers is a program called Monarch Watch. Many of you are probably familiar with that. Monarch Watch is run out of the University of Kansas, and what they are doing, the investigators there are tracking migratory patterns for the monarchs as the fall generation moves down to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico during their migratory movement. So end up tagging these, so the students are out with their nets, go out and show them how to properly net or properly to handle the butterflies. But we have some of these tags returned, which is really kind of cool. So we have three basic citizen science projects that we engage in when we're in the prairies. Monarch Watch, as I mentioned, iNaturalist, and then Globe Observer. Globe and iNaturalist are international citizen science programs that we engage our students in. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to create an atmosphere where students have a positive view of scientists and actually begin viewing themselves as scientists. So I'm going to do a little experiment. So, by the way, this is the participatory part of this, okay? So I know a lot of you are professional scientists in the audience, but I please want you to put on like your non-professional hat on right now, and I want you to basically give me an image that pops into your mind of what a scientist looks like. By the way, I do this exercise with teachers when I do professional development.
Like you.
Like me, okay? I don't know if that's good or bad. Go ahead.
Children.
Children?
They're testing their environment.
Yep. Anything else?
Someone in a white lab coat looking at a
Yeah.
microscope. Yeah.
Okay, how many of you picture that particular scene in your mind? Okay, yeah. So like I said, I do this with teachers because I want to get them in a mindset that their students can be scientists. Okay, there's more than just professional scientists. So these are the images that they cook up when we do this. Okay, you nailed it, all right? So it's usually somebody in a lab coat working with test tubes indoors. That's usually what we look at. Here's another one. And here's one of my favorites. Okay, Albert Einstein, of course. But here's the stereotypes that we often paint when we're talking about science and scientists. And they're pervasive, by the way. Okay, so we picture a male. We picture a white individual. Kind of an indication of danger. You guys notice the bubbling test tubes in the background. Mythic stereotypes. Okay, mad, crazed, wild hair kind of individual. Indoors, and as you mentioned, middle-aged. So thank you for calling me middle-aged, by the way. But children can be scientists, and they can do scientific activity. So I want you to take a look at this scene. These are ecologists out doing a transect, looking through quadrats, probably doing frequency and density of some native plant. But here's a really cool scene. These are the students doing the same thing. Okay, they're not doing it at the same degree that the professional scientists are doing it, but they're learning the principles of how to do this. And by the way, those are dog training utility hoops that we're using for that. And you can see they're engaged. All right, they're really engaged with science in this particular scene here. And when we get them out on the prairie, this is not atypical. They're really engaged. So by doing science and conservation and place-based learning environment, students build confidence and start seeing themselves as capable scientists. We just haven't given them the opportunity to do that. So these students are doing some of the abiotic factors, part of our GLOW program, just doing surface temperature measurements, air temperature, looking at soil moisture, things like that. So, who's involved in this? Well, all of these green and red flags on here, these are schools that are currently participating in Project Prairie. The green ones are ones that are installed prairies, functioning prairies, or are being installed now. The red ones are ones that we're in process of getting on board. But we have over 50 schools now in Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan, who have prairies on their campuses. Anywhere from a 1/4 acre up to 2 acre prairies have been installed on these campuses. So it keeps my department quite busy. This has become a really huge part of what we do in my department at the Toledo Zoo. So just want to show you how this all works. So what does it entail? Okay, getting a prairie in your school. Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to go in and we have to use an herbicide. Might seem counterintuitive, but we have to get rid of all the competing vegetation. We have to start with a blank slate. So we'll go in, and actually this is the prairie that you saw earlier on that Google Earth image at Holland Elementary. So we go in with a boom truck, and we spray an herbicide. So we have to get rid of that, otherwise we are going to be battling invasives the entire time that we're trying to get this thing established. We then return in the winter time, and we do the seeding in the winter time, okay? So the reason we do that is because it conditions the seed to properly germinate. The other problem is if we seed too early in the fall, you still have temperate kind of temperatures. They may actually end up starting to germinate dead, and then when winter comes along, it kills off all those seedlings. So what we do is we go in with a seed drill, we put the seed in, but we also save some of that seed out in order for the students to participate in the actual installation of the prairie. We do plugging, so we return in the spring then, and we have these tray packs of 36 small nursery-grown plants that we drill holes in the prairie with an auger, and then the students return and they drop those plants in. And then the other thing that's required is patience. Because this is not a microwave situation. It takes 3 years for the prairies to get well established. So there's a little bit of saying that goes with that. First year they sleep, second year they creep, and third year they leave. So it takes a while for these things to get established, and sometimes that's hard to drum into principals and administrators that, you know what, it's not like, that's not a field of dreams scenario. You don't put it in and they will come. It takes a while for these things to get up and going. We also provide equipment for the teachers, the shared equipment for them to get out and start doing these investigations. Here's some real simple, this corrugated piece of sheet metal here and like plywood, putting what we call cover objects out, turn those over, see snakes, redback salamanders, all sorts of things. So we utilize those simple tools, putting them out in a prairie so you can see what kind of wildlife you have moving into the area. We also do a full-day professional development with the teachers. Many teachers are very unfamiliar with prairie habitat, so we basically take them out and we walk through the prairies and we talk to them about ecology. They, of course, want to know what the plants and the animals they're seeing, so we do that. But we also spend a lot of time doing pedagogy as well with the teachers. We also work with the students. So this is Alex Burris, one of my staff members, who spends a lot of her time doing this. As you can see, they're actually doing a transect through the yard, through the lawn, and And they're also doing a transect in the prairie, and then they're basically comparing those two. How are they similar? How are they different? Again, they're doing real science out in the prairies. We use inquiry pedagogy. Like I said, that's really important, and this is basically what we call the quest inquiry cycle that we use. It's an acronym for these various steps right here. Easy to remember, but it goes through the entire scientific process. Again, we have different levels that we implement that with because we work with anywhere from K through 12 on this program, so we have to develop a lot of different materials. We have curriculum that's been developed. We have a steering committee composed of teachers in the community, administrators, zoo staff, where we put the curriculum together so it meets the needs of the students and the teachers in the classroom. And then again, I mentioned the citizen science projects. If you're not familiar with citizen science, there are tons of citizen science programs out there. But one thing that's really important about citizen science is it's participatory. Anybody can be involved with it. And I think it's fun. It's fun to do. And the students do too. So I mentioned Monarch Watch. By the way, we've had recaptures. So a couple of years ago, we had a recapture from Lake, Texas. That was 1,200 miles. So this is very interdisciplinary, like how far did they travel, how far did they have to travel per day in order to go from, I think we captured that one on October 7th, and the one down in Lake was recaptured like in November 15th or something like that. One thing I did find out about Lake, Texas, I got on to Street View, is that everybody in Lake, Texas owns a pickup truck. I did find that out. Globe Observer. Globe is a NASA-operated citizen science program, and we do a lot of investigations on the abiotic factors in the prairies utilizing Globe. As a matter of fact, we're having a little symposium at the zoo here in another couple of weeks that actually will focus on Project Prairie, projects that the kids have been working on year-round. iNaturalist, how many here do anything on iNaturalist? Okay, a few you do. Lots of fun to work with. We do a program every year called the Project Prairie BioBlitz. So in the platform, I can create a project. So as you can see, these are some of the schools that participate in the BioBlitz. You can see Hawkins is kind of hitting it out of the park. They have almost 1,400 observations. I want to show you this. These are observations that students made. Okay, this just shows you the number of species, but look at this. These are the observations the kids made out of that prairie. So all of those bubbles that you see, those are observations of a specific plant or animal that the kids made. And then somebody on the other side, usually professional scientists, they will actually verify what that student or that teacher saw. And it becomes what's called a research-grade observation. And then I mentioned Project Prairie Symposium. We've really ramped this up this year. So these are projects that the kids have worked on in their prairie throughout the year. And so they basically present the results of those projects at the symposium. This year is a 3-day event. May 6th, 7th, and 8th. We have over 400 students who are going to be presenting the results of their projects that they've worked on, either an independent project or a globe-related project. So funding, by the way, we don't do this for free, okay, so we need funding. And it takes a lot of funding in order to do this. And by the way, Owens Corning gave us a very generous grant that permits us to install 50 school prairies over 5 years. And that includes all the maintenance, all the educational programming, all the equipment that goes along with it. So at the end of 2027, we're going to have 70 schools in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan that actually have prairies on their property. So to summarize a little bit about Project Prairie, it links the Toledo Zoo's Wild Toledo program that I talked to you about earlier directly with schools in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. Converts vast areas of turf grass to native habitat that attracts native pollinators and other fauna. Introduces teachers and students to new ways of learning that are outside the classroom walls. Can't stress how important that is, getting the students out of the classroom in order to study science where it should be studied. And then engages students in citizen science activities, collecting data about plants, animals, and the environment, and engaging them in local conservation efforts. Again, I mentioned earlier, you know what, we have elephants, we have hippos, we have vipers, we have all sorts of animals at the zoo. Sometimes it's really hard to connect the students to those animals, but it's easy to connect the students with a bumblebee that they're observing, or that great horned owl that they saw on their trail camp. Much easier, and it gets them really excited about science and about natural history. So thank you for your attention. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about Project Prairie and about Wild Toledo. It's my favorite thing to do at the zoo, and I hope to be able to continue it for many years to come. So thank you very much.
Any questions for Mitchell? And this time around, we have a microphone, so when you have a question, please wait until the mic finds its way to you, okay?
Thank you.
In Ireland, there are no lawns or the yards or whatever you want to call the grassy areas. From the street to the sidewalk are grasses and wildflowers from the sidewalk to the front door, the same. And there's hardly any. Oh, okay. I talk with my hands, so okay. And I didn't see any blacktop of any kind or cement areas. They use stones, so when it rains, which it does there, and it goes in to the soil beneath the stones, just filters back in. So they're very environmentally conscious there. Everywhere you look, you know, grasses and wild, and of course bumblebees and bees of all kinds, you can see them flitting around in the greenery. My question is, I'm just making this statement about Ireland. They also have no mow May, so I'm wondering about any of this coming to fruition, and what you do, of course, is towards that goal.
What goal is that? I'm sorry.
The goal of being more environmentally conscious and getting rid of all our lawn mowing and all that.
Well, I mean, hopefully, obviously, getting the students out and doing this work and exposing them is going to be really important for future generations. So that's one of the reasons we do that. One of the big hurdles that we run into is actually changing the mindset of politicians, okay, because they want basically a manicured landscape. I think a lot of you have probably driven by the zoo and seen what we've done to the boulevard over by the zoo, over between South Avenue and Woodsdale. And we've had a battle with that with City Council. It's just really hard to get out of that whole mindset about, you know, what an urban landscape should look like. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do. Like I said, my emphasis is working with teachers and with students. All right, so easier to mold the mind of a student than it is many of us middle-aged people. Okay.
They also have a no mow May.
Yeah, some cities actually have that in the United States now too. Yes, sir.
Are there identifiable prairie killers, for example, deer, and how do you deal with prairie killers?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. In fact, we ran into another another prairie killer that I hadn't considered, that is Canada geese. Canada geese, as you well know, I mean, I've been around this area for decades, and the number of Canada geese that are in this area feeding on lawns is ridiculous. So give you a case study on that one. So we installed a Prairie and Chase STEM Academy, which is in North Toledo. That butts up against Manhattan Marsh. It's a beautiful area over there. They have a real goose problem over there. And so what we discovered is that as we got that thing going, the geese were eating all of the grass around. And then when they would defecate, all of that seed that was in ragweed just went crazy there. And so we are really battling and trying to figure out how can we exclude Canada geese. Now, I know at some organizations, they use dogs to take care of that, but I don't think that's going to be a solution over there. So that is the one that we ran into. Deer is another one. Deer have been a problem with a lot of native plants. There's a state species of special concern here in Northwest Ohio called lupin, Lupinus perennis. That is one that has really suffered from deer browse. And so part of that, as you well know, we did this call at Wildwood, but getting the white-tailed deer population under control has its own set of challenges. So there's no doubt it's challenging, but we haven't come up with ideal solutions to it yet.
Thank you.
Hi, my husband's a teacher at Mason Consolidated right up over the line in Michigan, and I noticed that's not really an area that you guys have gone into yet. What's the process to get started with you guys? Like, is there like an application process?
Yeah, come down and get my card. That's how easy it is.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, we're queuing up prairie installations now in the 26-27 school year. And so now's the time to get in. So yeah, what we'll do with that, give us a call, we'll do a consultation. So me or one of the staff will go to the school, talk to the principal, talk to the teachers, make sure this is something that they really want. By the way, that's really important because if a school does not have a champion principal or teacher, it's going to fail. And that's the one thing I look for. I have to have a champion on that staff in order for this thing to succeed. If I don't have that, and by the way, I learned that the hard way. So I really need that. I need somebody who really wants to do this and is going to really push this. So I'll come and do the consultation, ask questions like that. Is this something you really want to do? We'll take a look at the grounds, figure out, like, do you have a space that we can put this? I have an MOU, so we have a memorandum of understanding that I have all the schools signed off on, so we all know each other's responsibilities getting into this. But there's no application process. It's a consultation. That's how we do it. So yeah, see me afterwards. I'll give you my card.
Hi. When you clear the land to prepare your prairies at these schools, so you use an herbicide.
Correct.
Now, when you lay down the seed with the herbicide underneath, are you contaminating those seeds?
No, because the herbicide that we use breaks down pretty quick, so we're not going to be contaminating the seed that we put in. And to be honest with you, I wish we could use another method with the size plots. You guys probably all know you can put down black or clear plastic on top of the grass and basically cook it. And actually, that's frankly, I feel like that's a much more appropriate and more effective way, basically, because you're literally sterilizing. It's almost like putting your soil into an autoclave. But no, the herbicide that we use will not impact the seed that we're putting. It'll break down by the time that we get that seed in the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the great talk and the amazing work you do. You mentioned the effect of climate change on the habitat of prairies. I couldn't help but notice that one of the sponsors was BP. How can you ensure that amazing initiatives such as yours are not used for greenwashing to absolve from the crimes of their involvement, for example, of BP?
Well, you know, the short answer to this, I can't. I mean, we could probably go through some kind of a vetting process to see how they're looking at this, how they're viewing it. Is this part of their environmental governance goals for the organization? So we do not vet that right now, but that's a really excellent question. BP, by the way, they did sponsor all of the installations in the city of Oregon. Frankly, this is an expensive adventure, and I feel like it's important that we put these in schools, that the schools have the opportunity, the teachers and the students, to participate in real science, and also to convert those lawns into habitat. So, yeah, we don't have a way of crawling into their head and figuring out what their ultimate motives are. But yes, I mean, that's definitely a point. It's definitely a point. I agree.
Thank you.
I just had a follow-up question on when you were talking about the herbicides. Do you have to do any kind of soil remediation first, or do you really just get rid of everything and then plant the seeds and you're done?
We generally don't do soil remediation. What's really interesting, and I make this clear when we go into any of the schools, all of that soil that we're seeing at schools, that's all backfill for construction. Whether the school is 5 years old or 50 years old, that's still that's backfill. All right, so it's not supplemented in any way. And I'm not so naive as to think that like that soil structure is going to change anytime soon. By the way, related to that, one of the things in the MOU is that the school has to guarantee that they're not going to mow down that prairie if they have a change in administration. Okay, because we want to see the long-term environmental benefits of this. And by the way, we found that we learned that lesson the hard way as well. All right. So yeah, I mean, I went through the school hard knocks with this to kind of figure out, yeah, we need to vet that kind of stuff because like it might become an inconvenience at some particular point to get an administrator in there. We want to get those things in there for the long term. Then they're going to have a climate impact. By the way, right now we have about 15 total acres of prairies through the schools. You know, that's not a lot, but you know what? Doug Ptolemy makes the point, every little bit helps. Every little bit helps.
So I have a question. So like I understand that you had said that if like some of the teachers stuff would not get along on board, is there any like events or volunteers that you're like suggested for the schools so like they could get on board or like help to understand like how this is important for the students and the staff?
So kind of like a professional development piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've done a couple of different models with the professional development. One model is that we instituted, we did this a lot during COVID, it's basically a train-the-trainer model. Okay, so the teachers, we train that champion because there's not a better spokesperson for the school than that champion teacher or principal. All right, so that's a big plus. You have to be able to speak about this with passion. And then introducing that to, let's say, the parents, and by the way, we've done presentations to PTOs. Okay, so there has been buy-in from the entire school community on these projects. Give you a good example, Door Elementary, which is in the Springfield system, they paid for it out of pocket through their PTO funds. Okay, so we are making headroads with not just the school, but also parents of the students that go to that school.
My homeowners association isn't going to let me go to the prairie. They get mad if I don't mow my grass. How do you get rid of those little yellow flowers in your yard in the spring?
Oh, you mean dandelions?
Oh, those, yes.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't get rid of them. Again, this is really fundamental. It's really changing our mindset about what urban landscaping is all about. All right, so having that perfect lawn that looks like a golf course, like a putting green in a golf course, you know what, I'm not saying that like you're evil or anything to have that, okay, but I think that we need to have a little bit more latitude on how we look at our urban landscape. Okay, so dandelions, you know what, I mean, I've had neighbors before, like I had dandelions, hey, your seeds are getting in my yard, see that dandelion there, that came from your yard, all of that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, I was going to mention HOAs, because more than likely, an HOA is not going to let you do this, but you know what, you can get around it in kind of a trickery. You can install a prairie landscape instead of a true prairie if you wanted to do that. All right, so we have those facilities at the zoo, we have that capability. to do prairie landscaping. So that is more acceptable. Okay, so we're going to install a garden, but it's going to be a prairie landscape. All right, so we have all of the native plants in there, attracting all the native butterflies, all the native beetles, all the native bumblebees. So that's how we kind of get around that. So like in my yard in Oregon, you know, I've got a wild prairie growing in my backyard. My neighbors are extremely tolerant, by the way. All right, so I've explained to them what I'm doing. I cheat a little bit, I'll let it kind of creep out every year, right? And imperceptible, and then all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing here? You know, one of those kind of things. But yeah, I would think that, and oh, by the way, there's also municipalities that don't allow that as well. Give you an example, my son lives in Grandview, Missouri, right outside of Kansas City. Prairie land out there, he can't grow prairie on his property because it's against it. There's a city ordinance against it. In Kansas, we're crying out loud. So.
Quick follow-up question. Are rules different for what you can do in your backyard versus front yard? Visibility kind of thing?
You mean like in Oregon or just in,
where
just in general?
is it typical?
You know what, that's a good question. It would probably vary from your municipality, but no, I'm not aware of any big difference. I do it because I think it's going to be easier for me to get away with it in my backyard.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. When the city doesn't know what we're going to say.
So I'm wondering if you have a field guide that can help you with little bumblebees, and what seed source you use for wildfire, for the plants you grow.
Yeah, great question. Okay, I'll answer the one. Okay, there's a bumblebees of the North America. Sheila Choya is her name. That's the quintessential bumblebee guide here in North America. Highly recommend it. To be honest with you, a lot of times if I'm kind of struggling with ID too, I'll just take a picture of it and post it on iNaturalist. Or there's another citizen science program that's run out of the Xerxes Society. Has anybody here heard of the Xerxes Society? Okay, Xerxes, yeah, they promote the conservation of terrestrial invertebrates. And so they have a citizen science program called Bumblebee Watch. So that's another one. So, but the one by Choya, that's probably the best one. Seed source. Most of our seeds are not local genotypes. I'll be totally upfront with you about that. And to be honest with you, I knew I was going to get that question today. Yeah, no, that's right. And it's an excellent question. A couple of things I guess I have to comment. One is we're not doing prairie restoration work. We're doing habitat work. Okay, so we're getting habitat into these schoolyards. And to be honest with you, would I rather have the local genotypes? Absolutely, but the seed, the quantity of seed is just not there for us right now. So I'd rather move ahead and get native habitat in and have that lawn there. The other thing is the location of a lot of these prairies, the gene flow is not going to be there. Okay, so like if I'm talking about like Hiawatha Elementary School in the Washington local system, that's pretty isolated. Okay, now I'm not saying that is the case. So like Holland, probably not. Okay, it's not going to be at Holland. But in a lot of these areas, okay, you're going to have limited gene flow. But it is an excellent question, and we struggle with that.
I was asking specifically about the plants that you sell to the public in your twice a year sales or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that the same?
Yeah, same thing. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, thanks for asking that question. Like I said, I knew I was going to get that. It's a legit question.
Right.
In the interest of time, we have to close the Q&A session right now. Let's thank our speaker one more time.